All right, welcome to Mastering the Middle Game. So we have to dumb down the lecture for obvious reasons. No, not because of the audience, although that's, because I'm a grandmaster, so I have to play like a master. So I control lots of my games since I've been playing badly lately. Today, we're gonna look at one of my games, but not the whole game, because then you'd leave. And then we're gonna look at my favorite game of the year. Now this is very strange because my favorite game of the year featured the move of the year, and when I showed the game to Rex earlier, he found it. So that doesn't make any sense. So it's not my favorite game anymore. Oh. Anyway, hopefully we'll still be live next year, although I doubt it. All right, now this is a very long story because I like stories. Also, it kills time for the video. About a month ago, possibly 2 months ago, I don't remember, I was in Georgia, the one that's a country. And when I gave this in a kid's lecture, the kid's like, there's a country named Georgia? So he learned one thing in the lecture, that Georgia was a country. And I flew there from Georgia. A true story. You guys at home already know this. Okay, and I stopped at Istanbul, not Constantinople. And I even asked them, why is it at Constantinople? And they said, that's nobody's business but the Turks. So there you go. Anybody? No, you got that? Wow. That's the only joke you're ever gonna get, so you better laugh it up now. Okay. So someday he might be a giant. Bam. Okay, did you get that one too? Okay, good. If you didn't, then you were lying before. All right. Now, when I was in Georgia, I had 4 students. 3 of them I knew, and one, they're like, you want to work with him? And I'm like, all right. And he's the world under 12 champion now. So, and I gave a lecture about him last week, but I don't know if it was recorded. No? Okay, so there you go. And his name is Nikhil Kumar. Hopefully he'll be here in February or March playing in a Norm tournament, if I have anything to say, which I don't. Okay, and Nikhil plays the Caro-Kann, which I also play occasionally. And in round 1 of the Norm tournament, where I lost all my games, I actually found a game not to lose so I could lecture about it. Then the rest of the games you'll never see. Okay, and that was against Tatev Abrahamyan. She decided to lose all of her games to be nice to everybody. Then when she plays in the US Women's, she'll win all her games and win $30,000. So that was a good idea she had. Okay, win all your games in the Women's and lose them all where there's no prize money. I agree with that sentiment. I always tell my students, when you're playing for fun, lose all your games. Then when it's rated, then win all your games. So that way they get to win and lose, but gain rating points every time. Okay, speaking of winning and losing rating points, Magnus Carlsen. All right, now Tatev always plays E4. And I played her once in Chicago, and I played the Sicilian, so I'm not playing that again. And I decided to play the Caro-Kann because I wanted to try to play this line that I learned from my student at the World Cadet. So if you're not gonna win chess games, you might as well steal your students' ideas, okay? And Tatev in the Caro-Kann always defends her pawn by moving her knight. Other moves are E5, the advanced variation, and E takes D5. You could also play the fantasy variation, F3, breaking a very important rule. Never play F3. Okay. Anyway, she played what she normally does, and we played the main line of the Caro-Kann. Probably there's 8,000 or 9,000 Grandmaster games in this position. And here, white can choose between bishop F4 and bishop to D2. In previous games, she played bishop to D2, and she did here. And the idea is white wants to castle, queenside. Now in this position, which I've had before with black, I've played queen C7, and I've played bishop E7. And those are both normal moves. And my student at the World Youth in Soviet Georgia, he suggested the move bishop to D6. Now, according to Akshat Chandra, who I just spoke to, who lives down the block, he thinks white should play king B1 here. Okay, so when I play Akshat Chandra, then he'll play king B1, and then we'll see who's right, probably him. And instead, Tatev played the normal move, knight E4, although she didn't know the move bishop to D6. Bishop to D6 is like the 4th most common move. In fact, earlier in the year, against US women's champion Nazi Pakidze, Nazi played the move A5. And then she attacked on the queen side, and Tatev should have won, but it was a draw. Okay, so bishop d6, Tatev's never faced before, and I did a lot of analysis of a pawn sacrifice, which I played later. And after knight e4, we got this position, and if I was a better player, I would cheat and play queen d5. Okay, because queen d5, you attack the a pawn, and maybe you'll trade queens with queen e4. But since queen d5 is illegal, I played bishop c7. And white has a move that stops queen d5. I can't hear you at home, so stop yelling at your computer screen. What's that? D5? D5 does not stop queen d5. So no. C4? C4, which is... Explosion. Yeah, see, there's the guys who watch my videos, right. C4. And this is the main move, this is the main line, although after bishop d6, she was out of her prep. And I studied this position with Nikhil and by myself. And Nikhil explained there's this pawn sacrifice here, b5. And well, I looked at it a little bit before the Tatev game, hoping that it would happen. And even though we prepared this for several of Nikhil's games, where he did in fact play the Caro-Kann, he never got to this position. And I got to the position the first time I played the Caro-Kann, so I showed him. Anyway, every grandmaster in the world here plays the move king b1. Following my rule, always play king b1. And the idea is you trade on c4 and you castle. White can take on c6 or play rook c1 first. Black plays rook to b8. And white's king seems a little less safe than black's king. Black's king seems pretty safe. And the pawn that I sacrificed gives me an open file. Now today I was playing Rex Singfield, our chess club's founder, and in one of the games, he was down a few pawns. And even though it was regular chess, I think it was 9 pawns somehow. Not sure how. Anyway, I told him, you're not really down pawns, just have more open files. So, okay, and black has the nice d5 square for his knight. Black has a nice bishop on all these diagonals. I have an open line to her king. She has an isolated pawn. And I've analyzed this a fair bit, and the computer says it's about equal. Now, Tatev wasn't familiar with b5, and she played a novelty because she didn't know the line, and she took on b5. That's never been played before. Well, it has now. Hasn't been played heretofore. And in preparing for this line, analyzing it for my student, I wondered what happens if white takes, since nobody ever took. And black, of course, plays queen d5, threatening to take this pawn 2 different ways and threatening this pawn. So I figured if white wants to win material, white should take this pawn. I would take this pawn, and white's a pawn ahead. So I don't know if it was the day before my game, although I think it was, or if it was in Soviet Georgia. I analyzed this position, and the computer says black's winning. It says I play rook b8, I play knight d5, I castle, the c6 pawn is weak, the b2 pawn is weak, and the king is weak. So the computer gives something like 1.4 for black. Okay, and the computer says white should play king b1 here, which is what Tatev played. And now I was on my own. I figured if I win my pawn back, this should be good for black. And I actually have 3 ways to win my pawn back, or maybe 4. I could take with the queen, I can take with the pawn, or I could check first, then the king would probably go to a1 and then take the pawn. And the computer wants me to do that. It wants me to check first, force the king to a1. But instead I took with the queen, and she traded queens. And I didn't know if I should do this or this. The reason is, with the king on b1, I have more moves that are check. Like if my knight comes in here, sometimes I take things with check. And sometimes when I lose my b pawn, I want her king on b1. The king's on a1, it's further away from the action. The computer prefers that. In any case, the computer prefers black for obvious reasons. Let's see if somebody could give me some of those obvious reasons. Why should black have the advantage here? Anyone? You can put your hand down at home. Anybody? Bueller? Why is black better?
More queenside mobility.
More queen, well, maybe. That actually happened later. I wouldn't say it now, but it's ended up being the case.
Knight can go to good squares.
Yeah, my knight can go to d5 or e4 or g4. Well, white has an isolated pawn, which isn't the greatest. And also of note is the pawn on h5 needs some babysitting. This rook is defending the pawn, otherwise I'll take it. And even if I move my knight away and you move your rook away, which is what happened, I can still try to win your pawn later. It's sitting on h5. So h5 is somewhat weak, d4 pawn is isolated, and my knight is better than her knight. In fact, white's knight has one good square. Where can the white knight go that would be a good square? Right now. Yeah. E5, so I got rid of that. I made sure the knight couldn't go to e5, then the knight had no good squares. Now, my opponent made sure I couldn't castle, but more importantly, she didn't want her bishop being on these silly squares. So she played bishop to b4, and the bishop can sit on c5, defending this pawn, attacking this pawn, stopping me from castling. Okay? And I stopped knight e5 by playing my favorite move, also known as my least favorite move. F6. Okay. Remember, F6 is bad, F5 is good, except here. Although I did play F5 later. So my knight's pretty good on d5, and it can't really get harassed. And her knight, I don't know, it's on f3, can't go anywhere. So black has a nice advantage, and well, just in general, if you see an isolated pawn and you see a knight in front of it, just better for the side with the knight. And one advantage to having an isolated pawn, especially in the center, is your pawn is defending these key squares in your opponent's position, but the e5 square doesn't matter because white can't play knight e5, and there's so few pieces on the board, I'm not concerned about my king. Now, one person I looked at the game with, and she was really impressed with this game, so we're getting married in 2 weeks. I was very impressed. She was like, you played king f7 and king d7, why didn't you castle? Of course, castling's illegal, but that's okay. I explained I didn't want to castle, and she was confused. She's like, why wouldn't you want to castle? Well, in the end game, when there's very few pieces left, usually if you castle, you just start bringing your king back to the center. In this instance, there's two things white wants to do. Either crush me on the c file or crush me on the e file now that I've weakened e6. So king to d7 or f7 make a lot of sense, defending my e pawn and defending the key squares. And I want to connect my rooks, so I got to move my king off of e8. And I would call the rest of the game an endgame, so we don't really have to look at it for this lecture. However, I will show you a double blunder because that's fun. Blundering is the most fun you can have. At some point in the game, I decided I was going to win, and she decided she was going to lose. And actually, this happened in another game in the tournament, but that didn't happen. And what I mean is, if you looked at me, you'd be like, wow, he thinks he's going to win. If you look at my opponent, like, wow, they think they're going to lose. The reason it happened in this game was I had everything and extra material, and I was up like 20 minutes to 1. So when you have 1 minute left and you're completely lost, your opponent has 20, you expect to lose. In the other game in the tournament where this happened, I was up 2 pawns for nothing. And my opponent was like, should I resign? And she would make another move, and then I hung a piece. So that game ended in a draw in very suspicious fashion. Okay, so later in the game, which wasn't interesting for our lecture, but interesting for the double blunder, these moves are all very reasonable. And in this position, where white's losing, because white's down a lot of material and has an unsafe king, she made a blunder in this position. Of course, white's already losing. White's down 2 pawns. White has no time on her clock, and this looks pretty annoying. Okay, and here, she blundered with like 10 seconds left, and I didn't punish her, because normally my opponents don't give rooks away in Grandmaster tournaments. You and your opponents and you at home give a rook away even when you're not playing. I don't know how you do that. Okay, you do it. Admit it. Okay, right? The people here are like, man, I can't believe I did that. I was even playing, I lost a rook. And here, my opponent played rook takes a4. And I played my plan, which was to double rooks. That looks pretty good. The reason is, it's pretty good. But actually, I can win a whole rook here, which is even better. Who can raise their hand and explain the winning sequence of moves where black wins a whole rook? Also, winning a whole rook is good, for those of you at home. See, I told you you could win a rook and you couldn't find it. No wonder I couldn't. You have to break one of my rules. I don't break my rules, so I couldn't find it. One of my rules is never. I have a lot of nevers. It's not F3, it's not F6. What else could it be? Never trade. So I'm not trading for these stupid rooks when I can double rooks on the 7th, so I didn't. But if I do trade rooks, I would guess she would probably take back. And then if I check her, I would never check somebody's king off the back row, so I don't think of these moves. However, that seems pretty good for black. Yeah. Okay, so that would have just won the game immediately. Instead, I played rook c2, and I also won the game immediately, but not because I played well, because she made a mistake here. To confuse the issue and open my king, she should play the move d5. And the idea is if I take, then she can take, and my king is a little bit exposed everywhere. She can check me with her rooks. And after d5, the computer says I'm up something like 1.3. If I had taken a rook, I'd be up everything. She would have resigned. Instead of d5 with seconds on her clock, she took on a6, and now there's no tricks left. And here she resigned. When she resigned, and I went downstairs, and people were like, you won? So I was checked for electronic devices, because they'd never seen me win before. That's okay, I didn't win again. That was the only game I won in the whole tournament. And, because I stopped cheating at that point. And they were like, is there a mate here? We're looking for mate. And I was like, I just want to take this bishop and check and take a pawn. I'll be 3 or 4 pawns up. I didn't. And I don't think there is a mate. You just win lots of pawns. But I had no intention of mating my opponent, because that's not nice. Okay, now that game was like the appetizer for the game of the year and the move of the year. Okay, and this is the game you all know. That means they don't know it. Between Levon Aronian and Rapport. Now, what's funny about this is when the World Championship was going on, we were all falling asleep. Draw, draw, draw. There was a tournament here where we did not fall asleep, where everybody was hanging all their queens, and there was checkmate everywhere, and somehow Anand beat everybody easily. And in that tournament, I was asked who should play in that tournament. And they said, we have 3 players. We have Anand, Caro-Kann, and Nakamura. The problem was, during that tournament and during the World Championship, there was a tournament you've never heard of called the European Club Cup, and every Grandmaster in the world was playing in that. So to get the 4th player, they were like, how about him? No, he's playing in the European Club Cup. This went on for a long time. And I suggested Rapport because of his interesting, entertaining style of play, and they're like, he's playing in the European Club Cup. So they ended up getting which 4th player? Who was the 4th? Topalov, very good. Okay, because Topalov doesn't play a lot, so he wasn't playing there. But then we drove a dump truck full of money up to his house, so now they showed up. Okay, so during the Anand debacle where he crushed everybody, and Fabiano, Hikaru, and Topalov also played for some reason, and during the Carlsen-Karyakin match, there was also this tournament. So there's a real boon in chess. And the funny thing about this game, there was a team that had MVL on board 1, he's ranked like number 3 or 4 in the world, and Aronian on board 2, and they both lost the same match. So you gotta have some better players. These players aren't good enough. And this game, Rapport is black. Now the reason Rapport is good, sort of like MVL, is he never plays for a draw, he never plays boring. In fact, he plays a little too interesting, so some of his tournaments, he doesn't get any points. But he is rated about 2750, so he must be winning some games. And he's only 20, 21 years old. And if he's younger than that, I apologize. I think he's 20, but You guys can look it up and I can correct it before Anyway, he's he's the top junior in the world if he's still a junior, fighting with Wei Yi. I think Rapport is higher. And he plays wild and crazy and tries to win with both colors. Now, there's an unsound opening that I play occasionally, the Chigorin. And Richard Rapport played that against Aronian, showing he has no respect or something. And in this position, which I've actually had, he played a move I don't know. I do know there's a line where you take the knight and then play e5, but he played e5 right away. So he's sacrificing a pawn to make the game interesting. The game was interesting. And he made a threat. And I mean, I would never have this position with black because black's down a pawn that has no threats. But okay, white has some weak pawns. And black has a nice bishop to be developed, whereas white's can't. Black's ready to castle, white isn't. So black has compensation for the pawn, but again, a pawn is a pawn. Okay. And the game continued. And Aronian did something I would probably never consider. When I'm a pawn up and I'm white, I try to consolidate. Aronian, unlike me, tries to play the right move. Okay? And sometimes when you try to play the right move, you're wrong. You play a bad move. And I like to play the most solid, boring, slight advantage move so I don't get into trouble. And when you play the correct move, and sometimes you're wrong, then your moves are really bad. And when you're right, then you win in 20 moves. So if I was white, I would never win or lose in 20 moves here. I would win or lose in 60 moves. But Aronian, he said, I'm a pawn up. Black's not threatening to win it back yet. I have to play aggressive and force the issue. And he played the move h4, not a move that I would consider. Okay, I would say, hey, I haven't castled yet. I can't castle over here because there's too much air over here. So I would develop my bishop somewhere, and then I would try to castle. Okay, so h4 was played. And now, Richard Rapport, since he knew I'd be doing this class the next month, mastering the middle game, he wanted to give you guys a middle game lesson. And this is something I explain to all my students. They never listen to me, so I give them the same lesson again. More money for me. Okay? I'm like, do this. They're like, just like Bill Murray and SNL. And then they don't do it. And I tell them again, they're like, oh yeah. So you'll notice black has castled and that white has not. Because that happens about half the time. Somebody castled, somebody didn't. And not only did white not castle, white showed no interest in castling. He played h4. He's like, yeah, king's fine on e1. And you have to admit, white does have a lot of stuff in front of and next to his king. And black has nothing, so the king's pretty safe. We have to open up the center. So instead of trying to win this pawn with something like rook e8, which would weaken the f7 pawn, so then maybe white would start attacking f7, he attacked the e5 pawn another way by opening up the game and accepting the fact that he would be down a pawn. By playing what move? A move I would never play. F6. Okay, and obviously if I play fe, I'm winning my pawn back and I'm opening up the f file and I'm attacking the queen twice. So he took the pawn. Now white is permanently a pawn ahead. On the other hand, white's giving a queen's tour. Queen a4, queen f4, move the queen again, move all of our pawns, never castle, never move our rooks. So black has good compensation. Black has a nice pawn structure. Black has everything out except the bishop on c8, which is coming out soon. And permanently speaking, I don't know where white's king is supposed to go now that there's open files. See, when you blunder all your pawns, you have open files. Okay, queen check, king tucks away. And finally, white decides, all right, I'll castle. Okay. And of course, we can't take the bishop on d2 because our rook on f5 is hanging. Our queen is actually doing something here. So rook e8, queen c2. And black has very good compensation for a pawn for two reasons. This bishop is not very good, to quote Lisa Simpson. And white's played the move h4. If I was white, I would play the move h4 to h2. Or possibly h3. I have to think about it. Okay, and the bishop on d2 possibly could improve later. The pawn on h4, it's not going back to h3 or h2. That's a permanent weakness. And black's pieces are all great. Rook h5, g3 is a little too weak and even for me, giving away knight f3 and queen h3, so I wouldn't do that. Knight g3 attacking the rook, rook d1, and now material's equal. And we luckily get to see the move and the game of the year. In this position, the rook is attacked, and Aronian played a very tricky move. And if you remember, the famous game in Vaikanze between Aronian and Anand, which I've also lectured on, where Anand played some of his preparation for the World Championship match and beat Aronian with black in 23 moves. And when you play very interesting, unusual, complicated chess, occasionally you make a big mistake and you lose the game really quickly. And when you don't make mistakes, then you win lots of games. So Aronian was number 2 in the world for a long time. Now he's hanging around number 7, and he's getting older. And the players who were very young, like Rapport and Giri and Caruana and so, they're getting older, but to the right age, not like Aronian. So Aronian here played the very tricky move, rook to d4. And he was hoping, after bishop takes rook, he would take with the e pawn, which unleashes the white bishop to the black queen, and the pawn is attacking the knight on e5. So he was like, okay, you can't take my rook because that would unleash my bishop, and white would have a double attack. And, well, if I don't play bishop takes rook, it's not really clear what I do here. Anyway, as I said earlier in the lecture, but you guys were probably asleep, I know they were, I showed this position to our chess club founder, Rex Singfield, and I said, here, black played the move of the year. And he thought about a minute, and he played the move. So that's why when you do puzzles at home, you solve them all, and then when you go to a tournament, you hang all your pieces. Because when you're doing a puzzle, people are telling you, mate in 1, mate in 2, how do you win? When you play a tournament, nobody's telling you nothing. Well, except when I was playing Tatev and cheating. Then the computer was like, do this. Okay, so in this position, black played one of the most amazing moves I've ever seen. And I'm sure you've all seen it before because it's the game of the year. And most people don't beat Aronian with black, especially people you haven't heard of. Richard Rapport, now you've heard of him. It's probably the last move you would make. That's a hint. That's why it's the move of the year. I'm sure white didn't expect this move at all. It's the kind of move you see at beginners tournaments where they don't know how to play chess yet. Very good. When you want a beginner, you know who to ask. Right. This class. Yeah. He actually called Vegas and bet it was h1 because, yeah. Rook h1. Now, white has 2 legal moves. And this is a forcing move. Check is the most forcing move, so you should analyze it. Knight h1 allows knight f3 check, and now white has 1 legal move, which is to give his queen away. So analyzing that variation makes it seem like this is good for black. Black's up a queen, and white's knight is on h1, and white's rook is attacked. So, okay, so Aronian took with the king, and now, after bishop takes rook, that variation we looked at earlier, e takes, attacking the queen and the knight, the h4 square is vacated. There is no rook. And now if we play e takes d4, we play queen h4 check, knight g4, and good luck to you. If you move the rook so your king can get out, I could check, and then I assume queen takes knight is winning. I could be wrong, but I assume it is. Okay, and probably, no, I don't think taking on f2 is winning. So probably just queen takes knight is winning. If that's not winning, then I don't want to be winning, because that's pretty winning. Okay, so after bishop takes d4, Aronian, who was probably very surprised by rook h1, well, there's no material disparity here. he gave his rook away and they took a rook. Now black's threatening queen h4 check and knight g4. So Aronian broke my rule and the computer doesn't like this move, f3, but that does stop knight g4. And now with knight g4 stopped, white is threatening to take the bishop two different ways. So he saved his bishop. Of course, black could take the knight and lose his bishop, but black doesn't want to trade pieces because white's king is very suspicious. So we want to keep a lot of pieces on the board. And looking at this position, even if white wasn't getting checkmated, white's pawn structure is not very good. And white's bishop isn't very good. And white's king isn't very safe. And black has everything, even though material is equal. Aronian tried to escape by running his king to the other side of the board. And his king was no safer over there. Now this is another move that I like quite a bit. Aronian wants to run his king away and hide. And Rapport wants to stop that. At the same time, he'd like to play knight d3 check. So what move did black play so he could do both of those things? Rook d8. Now moving the king is not good, illegal. And knight d3 is almost impossible to stop. And that's what happened. And now that the king's running that way, Rapport gets his queen to the queen side. Because there's no defense to like queen a4 check and queen b1 check and queen takes a2. And again, black sacrificed nothing. And if you've ever worked with Yasser Seirawan, he would say that black has a free attack. And that's an unusual thing, that you're attacking your opponent, didn't sacrifice anything. In fact, Rapport tried to sacrifice things, but he didn't do it. He's even material. He's trying to sacrifice. Okay, g4, Aronian starts the winning attack. No. Queen b5 with slight threats. Very slight. Also, queen a4 is not bad. Isn't queen a4 mate? So that's even better than my other threat. Although queen b1's meaner. Okay, so queen g2. The king is going to escape if the queen checks. Knight b2 check. Oh, the king is not going to escape. Okay. King c2. Knight c4. Lots and lots of threats. Bishop c1. Rook to d5. I really like this move because when the queen goes to a4 and the king runs away, we have another piece to attack with. g5. Here comes the mating attack. Knight a5. And now we're threatening not just to win the way I wanted to win. Now we have queen d3 check, rook b5 check, and then something to b1 mate, or knight c4 mate if the king goes to a3. So black's threatening everything. Queen a4 winning, queen d3 winning. He played bishop d2, and after queen d3 he resigned. I put this position on my engine. It said if you go here or here, it's mate in 3, because rook b5. For example, king c1, rook b5, this is hard to stop. Very hard to stop. And king b2 doesn't work either because of queen c2, threatening queen b2 mate. Again, impossible to stop in a legitimate way. You could stop it with an illegitimate way, but we didn't vote for Todd Aiken in the state. So, okay. Anyone? As long as you don't get it, I'm good. If you get it, I'm in trouble. All right, good. They didn't get it. All right. So after queen d3 check, the computer says king d1 is forced. But the computer is wrong because Aronian resigned. So you don't have to play king d1. After king d1, knight c4, the computer says black is plus 11. With the subtle threat, knight takes e3 check. Not good. If you defend e3, then you get checkmated and won. Also not good. Okay, so resigning was a good idea. Computer recommended. If you want to run your king away, so you play rook e1, defending the e3 pawn, now your king can't run away. Man, the truth hurts. Yeah, so resigning was a good idea. But I like this middle game because Black started attacking on the king's side. Aronian moved his king away, so Rapport moved all his pieces over to the queen's side. And remember, if you use all your pieces, your attack will work. And that's the problem a lot of people have. They want to sacrifice material and attack with one piece because their opponent's king is open. But if you attack with 3 or 4 or 5 pieces, your opponent's king is open by force because you have so many pieces attacking. And here, Rapport used all his pieces to attack the white king when the king was on the king's side, and when the king runs to the queen's side, it didn't find any safe haven. A very nice game from Rapport, winning with the black pieces against somebody who's been top 10 in the world for forever. And if I can complain a little bit, then I'll get back to my complaining. But talk about something else for a second. One of the issues in chess, which David Bronstein complained about, and he complained about everything, so that's not really saying anything. Bronstein didn't like the fact that there's an insulation of the top players. For example, you would assume, since you're all chess players, that you've played all the top players in the world, but you haven't. And you would think, well, I'm a grandmaster lecturing, so I've played dozens of games with the top players in the world. I've played the top players in the world 1 minute, blitz chess, and when they were 11 years old. Okay? But in slow tournaments, when they've gotten good, nope. I've played Caruana, I've played Nakamura, I played Anand. They were not top 10 in the world when I played them. They weren't top 20 in the world. They weren't top 30 in the world. I played them when they were like me, or even worse. And then when they got good, they only play each other. And when they do that, we see draw, 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 because they know each other's openings really well, their ratings are the same, they play safe, and if you draw every game, your rating doesn't change. If you're number 5 in the world, and you lose all your games, now you're not number 5 anymore. But if you draw all your games, and everybody you play is the same rating, then everybody's the top 10, nobody gets in. It's their own club. So when you have tournaments like this, where the top 10, top 20 players play lower rated players, then we get to see exciting things. We get to see lots of decisive games, lots of winning, lots of unusual openings that we don't necessarily see when the top players play each other. And in the long run, players who are 2,700 and 2,720, 2,740 will lose to the top 10 players in the world in a long match, but in any one game, they can win with the black pieces and play moves like rook h1 check. That's exciting for us. So that's why they never play me. They know I'm going to do that. I'm going to crush them. I've been waiting to play rook h1 check forever since I saw this game. Okay? And they're like, oh no, Ben's going to do that. I got to play Carlsen and draw and get my 3 rating points. Terrible. Okay? And that's why these guys keep ducking me. So I challenge the top players in the world. I dare you to play me. And if you accept it, I'm sick that day. All right, I hope you liked mastering the middle game. I didn't want to make it too hard, so we just did it at a master level. Very simple. Any questions? Seeing there's none, I'll see you guys next week.